Hi, this is Ann with the Learn and Grow Educational Series. I'm here in the Learn and Grow Virtual Sustainability Learning Center and Test Garden to bring you this video about understanding soil and fertilizers. This is part of our ongoing instruction to help people around the world learn how to grow their own food no matter where they live and to live sustainably. So let's just get right into it. So what is soil? Understanding what soil actually is goes a long way towards making sure that you have good soil for growing your food. Soil is a combination of solids, liquids, and gases. It's not any one of those. It's a mixture of all three. And the balance of those three that gives you the degree to which it's mud or it's hard, dried, almost like stone, a compacted brick-like substance, or what, so it comes in all these different forms, and you have to have an interplay of all of them in order to have well-balanced soil for growing food. You're going to need to have water being able to pass through it, and you're going to need to be mindful of what's in the solid material. How much of it is minerals, which is little tiny bits of rock, and how much of it is organic matter, which is rotting, decomposing stuff like old dead leaves and poop from animals and bugs and birds and all these things that are going to break down and decompose. And so you have to have a mixture of all of those things along with the soil, air, and the water to provide a nutrient-rich, nourishing environment for plants to grow, for roots to be really healthy. So bearing all of that in mind, how can soil get damaged? And bear in mind, for soil, the soil doesn't care. It doesn't regard itself as damaged. It's only damaged relative to what you want it to do for you. And so it's really it's damaged in light of what you want to make happen, not for the soil's sake itself necessarily. When it comes to the soil quality for food-bearing plants, what we consider damage is anything that makes the soil not really suitable for food-bearing plants. And so this can be anything from a nutrient deficiency to a dehydration issue to too much sunlight. So all kinds of things can harm soil in terms of making it viable for plants to thrive in or not. And so the types of damage that you could accidentally cause when you're gardening, it would be excessive watering or underwatering and creating dehydration. Overplanting the amount of space you have can also create a problem because now you're going to have more plants than you have nutrition. Either you're going to have plants that hog nutrition and starve off their neighbors, and then they become very, very strong and viable, but then the things around them die away. Or everybody's going to be equally deprived, and nobody in your planting situation, none of your plants are going to have enough food, and so none of them will be very strong or productive. So overplanting can create a problem, obviously. Over fertilizing can also cause a problem. Not having enough fertilizer leads to nutrient deprivation, but having too much fertilizer can actually create a chemical burn where the soil is just too chemically toxic, that you have this imbalance of all the different things that you need to have in place to make it nutrient rich. And so, whether you're depriving the plants of food or you're giving them so much food that it gives them a chemical burn, or you're giving them not enough water or too much water, all of these things can create a problem. And then you can also have situations where, like here in our garden, everything we do is in self-watering containers. And we actually had a problem last year where I was running our wastewater directly into the containers by just top watering in the soil. Well, what I wasn't really thinking about is even though we were using biodegradable cleaning products and things that are safe for the plants, because it's still nonetheless a cleaner, it's going through and the water's going through the soil in our self-watering containers and leaching all the nutrients out as it drains. And then all that water drains back down into the reservoirs, which the water gets recycled because they're self-watering and that's how they work. And I'll include links to our other videos about all of that. But the problem was that all of the nutrients were being leached out of the soil and turning into sediment down in the reservoir. And even though the water was being recycled back up into the container to keep the roots hydrated, the nutrients that have been leached out of the soil were not coming back up with the water. They were remaining as sediment in the bottom of the reservoir and then clogging up the reservoir. And so that was a really bad way to go, that you really don't want to top water the soil in self-watering containers. What we do now with our wastewater is, if we're going to have to do any kind of top watering like that, is we run it through our vermiculture composter first and then collect the runoff water, which is called leachate. And then what that does is the leachate, the runoff water, has gone through the composter and picked up all of this nutrient-rich particulate matter. And so now it's not just a bucket of wash water, it's a bucket of leachate. And then we can go and dump that into the soil of the containers. And that way it's not leaching nutrients out, it's actually putting more nutrients in. And then of course, we're doing the normal watering where we refill the reservoirs of the containers otherwise to keep the water levels appropriate. But that way we're able to dose the soil with the wastewater, but we're adding nutrients to it first so that we're not leaching anything out when we do that. We're being very sparing with how much we do it as well, because we don't want to over fertilize it and then burn the roots. With us, because we're splashing little bits of compost water, leachate, into the buckets, at least 2 or 3 times a week, they get microdosed with nutrients all the time, and so they never really get full-on depleted and then have to be re-upped. So we just keep it going on. It's like a maintenance kind of a thing. So if you can get a system down where you can do it that way, then it just kind of takes care of itself. You don't really have to think that hard about it. It's just, one of the things you got to do to take care of some chores. But that's, these are the things that you need to be concerned about. The other really important thing is not just the chemical balance. There's a really special relationship with soil and water. And soil type affects the degree to which it's enough water and keep water available to the roots of your plants, or hold too much water and cause the roots to rot. And so for us, we're using organic potting soil in our self-watering containers, plus the earthworms and beneficial nematodes. And we don't mix anything else in with it other than, it just is what it is. And we'll occasionally add compost, handfuls of blobs of compost from the composter full of earthworms and whatnot, mix it all in, put some fresh potting soil in, because it will compact, like I was saying, that eventually over time it will settle. And so every, growing season, when you're going to change out plants, if you have things that go through a season and then you pull them up and plant something new, you're going to rotate your crops. You want to fluff up the dirt and then turn some fertilizer into it and get it all, nice and fluffy and aerated, so that the roots have, spaces to grow in crooks and crannies and things like that, and for the water to travel in there as well. But you want to have a balance of sandy and clayey soil, because the sand is just quartz. As little teeny pieces of quartz, which are crystals, and crystals don't absorb anything. It's just, it's like glass. It's just going to slide. Water's not going to hang on to that. It's going to slide right off. Where clay is absorbent. Clay absorbs water. Clay absorbs all kinds of liquids. And so, and it will hold on to it. And so you have to have a balance of that. Too much clay is going to suck up all the water, and then there's not going to be anything for the roots of your plants. And so you have to have a soil that is loose enough and sandy enough for water to be able to move around in the air pockets and slip and slide around those glassier places. But also you want to have enough of absorbency that the water's not going to just pass through it and not stay. You want some water retention. You want some water to hang in the soil so that it nourishes the roots. And if you're doing any kind of container gardening, then you just go to the hardware store or the garden center and get a big old bag of potting soil, and problem solved. You don't have to think beyond that, because it's already figured out in terms of the balance and all of that. Like I was saying, you don't want to run too much water through, because you can leach out the nutrients, and too much water being retained in the soil is going to encourage compacting, but it's also going to slow down bacterial decomposition. And you want the aerobic bacteria that promotes all kinds of, healthy stuff in the soil. What you don't want is a lot of anaerobic bacteria growth. These are bacteria that do not require oxygen to thrive, which if you're they're in the water, if it's like a waterlogged situation, they don't need the air. They can thrive without that, but they don't benefit your plants in any kind of way. And if anything, they encourage rot. So you want the kind of bacteria that's healthy, that encourages plant growth, and that means that it's going to be breathing. And this is how these pockets of air and gases inside the soil get formed by this bacteria off-gassing its waste, basically, bacteria farts, but it creates the gases and fills those air gaps and helps hold them open because you've got that pressure of the gas. It's all very much part of a system of how the soil and the nutrients and the water all work together with the roots of the plants, and there's beneficial bacteria that grow symbiotically in the soil that promote root growth, and so you want to encourage that. And some types of bacteria, like if you grow certain types of, or if you grow beans or peas with other things, they will actually help create nitrogen in the soil because they attract a particular type of bacteria that grows around their roots that is nitrogen produced. It will actually create fertilizer for your soil simply by, the life forms that it attracts. And so you want to be able to nurture that kind of an environment in your soil so that it promotes the growth of your plants in a healthy kind of way. So all of that matters. And so it comes down to the organic matter, it comes down to the mineral content, it comes down to the absorption ability of the soil, how absorbent it is, and those kinds of considerations. Those are what you're really looking at. If you're going to the garden center and you're buying your supplies in that kind of a situation, whatever you get is going to be appropriate for whatever it is you're going to grow. It'll say on the bag. Now, if you are in a situation where you're having to source your materials raw, you need to know the soil conditions for each of the types of plants you're going to grow. And if you're starting things from seeds, very often on the seed packet, it will tell you the type of soil conditions it requires. But again, this is also something you can look up on the internet really, really quickly. Like, let's just do this really quick. Hey, Google, what type of soil do tomatoes require to thrive?
The soil pH should be slightly acidic. Excess nitrogen can result in plants with lush, vigorous foliage but little fruit production.
And there you have it. Research what it is you need to create for your plants, what kind of environments they need to thrive. And then you need to control for your water usage. Are you going to have to manually water everything? Or are you going to use a self-watering system like we do? Are you going to use drip irrigation? How are you going to make sure that your plants get just enough water but not too much? And then you're going to want to test your soil chemistry. And you can use homemade kits using baking soda and vinegar to do a pH test, like if you're looking at the acidity or alkalinity, the pH of your soil. But you can also get store-bought kits, or you can buy them online to do exactly the same thing. And I'll have links for those kinds of things below. But the kits will actually allow you to test for other kinds of things. Like I have a kit that allows me to test for how much nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, and I want to think iron in the soil. And so I can go through and do these chemical tests, and depending on what color the samples turn, how the soil and the little vial reacts to the chemicals I put in there, that tells me, and it has a little guide, a picture guide that says, okay, if it's this bright pink, then this means this. If it's like really super vivid pink, it means this. And if it's so pale that it almost looks like it's clear, then it means this other thing. And that tells you how much or how little you have of what you need in the soil. And they have a little guide that shows you how to interpret those results. And so it tells you what to add to your soil after that. So then it becomes about, okay, well, how do I, if I'm going to have to supplement the soil, if I'm going to have to nourish it with things, what can I nourish it with in order to make that happen? And, how am I going to fertilize according to the needs of my plants? What can I use? And so that becomes the next part of the conversation. So you can use store-bought fertilizers, and there's all different kinds. And there are factory-produced chemicals, and I'm not going to suggest that, I think that's a great idea, because even though it might have the chemicals your plant needs, it might also have chemicals that your plants don't need that are inactive ingredients, in which case, why are they there? Why, if you don't need them to make the plants grow? And a lot of times it's things like preservatives or stuff like that, which, do you really need that? So I prefer using organic stuff. I mean, we try to keep everything in a closed system here. Like I said, we use our vermiculture composter quite a bit to fertilize with. But sometimes that's not enough. Maybe I don't have enough to go around to hit every container, and I'm going to have to supplement with some extra stuff. And so I'll use things like bone and blood meal, which are byproducts of meat processing. And so it's byproducts of those animal processing facilities where, no part of the animal goes to waste. And so the blood meal is a good source of the nitrogen and some potassium and iron and those kinds of things. And then the bone meal is really good for the phosphorus and the potassium and the calcium and those kinds of things. And so, you get you can, based on what the chemistry needs are of the soil that you're trying to amend, after you've tested it and seen what it's low in, then you know what to dose with. Because sometimes if you get an all-in-one fertilizer, maybe the soil is fine for nitrogen, the real deficiency is phosphorus and potassium, or one or both. Very often both will be deficient at the same time, and so you want to be able to supplement that, or calcium or something like that. So you don't need the nitrogen. Well, then you're going to have to get a fertilizer that's higher in those other minerals and lower in the nitrogen. And whereas if you just do the bone meal and not the blood meal, then you're automatically going to get that kind of a balance, and it's going to lean more in the direction of the phosphorus and the potassium than in the direction of the nitrogen. Whereas if you have a really serious nitrogen deficiency, the blood meal is going to dose it really good. Kelp is a really good fertilizer, and it has all kinds of mineral stuff in it, not just nitrogen. It's actually pretty high in the phosphorus and the potassium as well. Also manure and guano, like from bat caves and things like that, and bird poop and livestock, cow and pig poop and horse poop, that all of those things are great fertilizers because they're very high in nitrogen, but they're not necessarily that high in all of the mineral stuff that you need, the phosphorus and the potassium and the calcium. So you have to supplement it with other things. What we do here is, like I said, we've got our composter that we do here. And then we've also got our composting toilet system. So what we do with that is that the waste from the composting toilet is collected in bins. And then each bin sits for about 8, 9, 10 months, depending on how quickly we're going through them. 6 months at least is safe to put the compost on tree roots. After a year, it's safe to use it for food-bearing plants, but we don't really need it for that. And we're on this huge property that's covered with trees, and so there's always a tree that can benefit from being fertilized and having some compost put around its roots at some point in time throughout the year. And so what we do is, as the bins get filled and it's time to empty them, we'll just dump the contents around the roots of trees here on the property. And then because it's the composting material that we're using, and the toilet itself is mulch, then you have the waste mixed in with that mulch breaking down in the composting bins. And so by the time we put it all out, you've got this really nutrient-rich mulch that it will stay around the roots of the trees, the wood chips and whatnot, the parts, those big chunky bits of wood that haven't broken down, limbs and things like that, little branches, that will hold the water close to the roots and help retain water around the roots so it doesn't all leach away when we water the trees as well. So it helps hold the water in, as well as dosing it with nutrients every time we do that. And so when we also have out here a tent yurt that we use as our part of our teaching space, and inside we have a wood burning stove. And in the wintertime, when the ashes build up inside the wood burning stove and they need to be cleaned out, we'll take the ashes and dump that into the bins with the composting toilet waste, because the wood ash actually creates or adds phosphorus and potassium and calcium. And so it's another supplement that, mixed with the nitrogen-rich compost, when you add the ash in there, now you've got a really well-balanced, well-rounded fertilizer material that really benefits the trees quite a bit. And so we have no sewage, we have no black water coming from the toilet system. All of our gray water from our camping shower and from our sink that we have out here in the garden, all of that water goes to the composter, and then the leachate goes into the containers with all the food. that we're growing. And so we try to, keep it as close to a system and as sustainable as possible with as little waste as possible. And so this is the system we've come up with. And fireplace, if you've got a fireplace in your house, if you've got, and it would be wood burned, burnt wood, wood ash. You don't want to use charcoal necessarily if it's got a lot of chemicals in it. You just want to be careful of what you've burned in terms of the ash you want to use. But if it's just plain old wood ash, it's perfect. And that makes a really, really good supplement to something that's nitrogen rich like compost, to make it a well-balanced fertilizer where you've got all the different areas of need hit, and it comes down to ratio. How much ash have you added to how much compost? And so it may not be enough to fully cover everything, but it's certainly not going to hurt. And if the only thing you have to do after that is supplement with a little bit of bone meal, then you've made it 75% of the way there with just stuff you already had on hand, and only had to supplement a little bit, because fertilizer's not cheap. And so if any way you can do it yourself is always better. And if you're going to just be repurposing waste you would have already created anyway, all the better. So what we don't feed to our chickens out here in terms of food scraps and garden scraps, we put into the compost. And then it eventually comes back to us one way or another. And so that's the presentation that I have for this video. I hope that was informative and that helped you have a better understanding of soil and fertilizer and the relationships and the balances that have to be struck. And hopefully this is enough guidance for you that as you go online looking for more information to get more details, it gives you a way to hone your search questions. Hopefully this has set you on a good path in that regard, where you can go forward and looking at the particulars of your own situation from a more informed point of view. And that way, when you go looking for more answers to more specific questions that are unique to what you're dealing with, your questions are informed by an understanding of what it is you need to make happen and the balances that need to be struck. So thank you so much for watching this video all the way through to the end. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and share. And we look forward to seeing you in future videos as we produce more. If you have any topics regarding how to grow your own food, no matter where you live, or living sustainably that you would like to see us address through our content, please post a comment or let us know otherwise through DMs or messaging through our website. Links to all of our socials and whatnot are below. And feel free to reach out to us with any questions you may have. If you are another nonprofit organization looking to address these same issues and think our content might be appropriate, then you think that we might be a good partner with you, then please by all means let us know as well. So thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you in our upcoming videos again.